of background into Tom is that Tom read law at university before he ran off to sea. And after that, he was heading up a sailing school in the south of France. He has served before the mast in small sailing ships, skippered yachts for private owners. He's raced offshore. He's worked at sea as a mate on a coasting merchant vessel, and he's taught sailing and navigation at all levels. He is, of course, an RYA, an MCA Yacht Master Examiner, a consultant for the governing body of sailing in the United States, and a fellow of the Royal Institute of Navigation. He has cruised on his own yachts to destinations as diverse as Brazil, Greenland, the Caribbean, and even communist Russia. And his many books include 2 Best Book of the Sea award winners, and in recent years he's also presented for Discovery Channel's ever popular Boatyard and the BBC TV's Boats That Built Britain. Now, he lives with his wife in the New Forest, where he keeps a large motorcycle and a 1949 Bentley, and he loves to cultivate roses. So Tom, welcome to your now, I think it's 2nd forum at MDL, and please welcome to our fabulous berth holders, and the floor is all yours.
Just said it makes me sound quite plausible, Tim, really, when you put it like that. That's thanks. Nice to see everybody here. Well done for showing up. We've had a nice day today, and I've just poured myself a pint of Golden Champion. So here's to all your good health. Now then, questions. Here we go. The first one, which has come up, is from Terry Knapp at Queen Anne's Battery. And my answer to you, Terry, is not going to be probably quite the one you want, but it'll help a lot of people in Southampton. The first question is disposal of out-of-date flares and alternatives. I mean, what are you going to do with your out-of-date flares? This is a running sore, isn't it? Whatever do we have to do with them? We're stuck with them and nobody wants them. Well, I was making a video at Ocean Safety, actually for MDL, earlier this week, and while I was there we were discussing flares, and the boys there said, well, look, if people want to get rid of their flares, they're probably going to want to buy some new ones, because otherwise why would you want to get rid of the old ones? Well, good point. And if you're buying them from Ocean Safety, all you have to do is walk in through the door with your old ones, hand them over, and that's the end of your problems. They'll deal with them for you. I'm not sure whether Ocean Safety have a base at Plymouth or not, Terry, but it may well be that there's somebody down there who will offer a similar service, somebody who's selling flares, at least an actual safety outfit that does them. I think you'll probably find that's how it'll work. Failing that, speak to the marina and I'm sure they'll be able to help you one way or another. Terry's next question is latest Ofcom regs and changes to ERP licence conditions. Well, Terry, I'm not your man for that. I'm absolutely hopeless at regulations, and licenses just fill me with horror. So I can't answer those questions, but I'll tell you who can. If you get onto the RYA and talk to Stuart Carruthers, he will have the answers. He is a great guy, and he's also a friend of mine, and I don't know whether he gets fed up with me telling people to talk to him or not, but he's brilliant, and he will have the answers to that sort of thing. Next question is from Rupert Simpson at Ocean Village. And he wants to know if there's any optimism regarding the restrictions on sailing in European waters. Well, I hope there is, because my boat lives for much of the time in Europe. She's actually in a shed in Denmark at the moment. And the biggest problem, if anybody's thinking about cruising in Europe, the biggest problem at the moment is the Schengen arrangements, whereby you can only be there for 90 days out of 180. If you, like I was 2 months ago, just bamboozled and filled with horror about trying to get to the bottom of these Schengen regulations, where do you calculate your 180 days from and all the rest of it? It's a absolute swamp, but I've discovered how to deal with it. It's actually dead easy once you know how. And this is what you do. You look at the day you are in now, the 21st of October, and you go back 6 months and you count up how many days you've had in Schengen in that period. And if it's less than 90, you're home free. You're all right today, you're not going to get fined. And if it's only 50 and you're in Schengen now, then you've got another 40 to go if you don't come home. It's as easy as that. If you come home and spend a few days at home and then you go back again, then start from the day you go in again Work backwards 180 days and see how many days you've used up, and subtract the number from 90, and that's how many you've got left. It's not as difficult as it sounds. It seems a bit tortuous, but it does actually work. Regarding optimism about it, I don't know, is the answer. Nobody seems to know. I'm a member of the Cruising Association, who are very hot on this sort of thing. They're constantly updating their information. So the CA, the Cruising Association, is a good place to go to get the very latest on this. And I'm in touch with them quite often because of my situation. Regarding the boat, that's another issue altogether. If your boat is already in Europe, you are part of the customs union and you've got no worries. If you were in Europe when Brexit bell tolled, you're okay. My boat was, and she can stay there as long as she likes. There's no problem about that. If I come back to Britain, of course, and I want to stay for any length of time, there's a question of the taxman hounding me for my VAT. But that's another question. If you go to Europe and you want to stay there for longer than, I'm not sure exactly what the period is, but there's a limit on it, which is readily available. You can find it online anywhere. Then you'll have to pay VAT. But if you just go to visit and then come back again, you'll be all right. There is one way possibly around the Schengen situation, which is not yet nailed down, but it's sounding quite promising, and that is to take out a visa for the country that you're going to spend the most time in. In my case, that would be Sweden, and the idea is that I go to Denmark, pick up a boat, or perhaps sail from Britain and enter Scandinavia, sign in, and Schengen would have started then. Then when I get to Sweden, I go to the customs man and say, here I am, please stamp me in. And they stamp me in and my visa starts running. Once the visa's running, I'm out of Schengen. So the 90 days doesn't matter anymore until I come out of Sweden. And that might solve my problem. Another problem I have is writing the Shell Channel Pilot, which is a book which I do, if you didn't know. And the Shell Pilot, I have to spend a lot of time in France to study the French harbours and to make the passages and everything else. And I might run out of Schengen days. So once again, if I got a French visa, it would solve that problem. French visas are a bit more tortuous than Swedish ones, as, dare I say it, you might imagine. But I think it is doable. So that can be a way around it. There's only one problem. You have to get a new visa for every country you want to visit. You can't just get one for Schengen. It doesn't work that way. They're not that kind. So we'll wait and see. But at the moment, that's the position as I understand it. Next question is from Andrew Gorry at Cobb's Quay, and this is an interesting one. He says, do I think there will be a fully electric motorboats in the next 5 years which will be able to go 100 nautical miles on one charge? Well, charging an electric motor, or the battery that powers an electric boat, is a bit like a ball of string, really. I am the proud owner of a Torqeedo electric outboard. It's a wonderful thing. It's great. It just breaks down its component parts. I can lift any one of them easily. My wife Roz, who is driving the camera and making sure everything works here, Roz can lift any part of it easily, not a problem. So that's a big plus. When we're going to the boat from in the car, we can just chuck it in the car. No problem. There's no oil to leak out, nothing like that. Doesn't matter which way up you put it, you just chuck it in and it's all right. All your bits and pieces, your battery, your tiller, they all come off and they all go in separately. So it's easy to transport and it's clean. It doesn't use petrol. Hooray! No more petrol on the boat, no more explosions, no more worrying about where I'm going to store it. All that stuff is a thing of the past. It's easy to charge. I can charge it at home. I can charge it on the boat. I can charge it with an inverter if I want, which is what I do. But if I didn't have an inverter, I can plug it in, and so long as I've got reasonably big domestic batteries, it'll charge through a cigarette lighter. So it's a wonderful thing. But the question everybody always wants to ask me when they see me putting it on the back of my nice 10-foot inflatable dinghy is, yeah, it's all very well, but how far will it go? Well, that's the ball of string. If I want to, and wind it up really fast, it'll go it'll almost make the dinghy plain. I think with a slimmer, more young man in it, probably would make it plain. It won't plain with me in it, but that's probably asking too much. But it's powerful. It will certainly knock the stuffing out of a foul tide in the Bewley River if I need to get to my boat. It'll do that for a reasonable length of time, long enough to do the job. But it will run out of power if you do that, give it the beans. But if you treat it as you would if you were rowing a decent rowing boat, it seems to last forever. If I time my passages in the dinghy to go with the tide, it'll run when the dog wouldn't run. It'll run for 3 or 4 hours at 3 or 4 knots, no problem at all. But if I ask it to do 6 knots, it goes down the tube. And I think the same is going to be the situation for mainstream electric motors in yachts or in motorboats. If you don't ask too much of it, if you drive it sensibly, it'll go for a very long time indeed. And I see no reason why there shouldn't be a motorboat in 5 years' time, which, driven sensibly, working with nature, rather than saying, oh, I've got an engine, I can do whatever I like, I'm the master of the sea. Well, you're not anymore, quite honestly, with an electric engine. You have to think about it. But used properly, I think it'll go a very long way indeed. A modern one with good charging arrangements, it'll be fine. I think that will happen. There's another question later on about electric motors, which I want to answer. This is from Chris Moddington at Northney Marina. And he says, do you agree that it's beneficial to take a GRP Cornish shrimper, that's a little fiberglass gaffering boat, out of the water for 3 months over the winter? Well, quite honestly, this question could apply to any of our boats, couldn't it? Any of our boats that are GRP. The question is it good for them to take them out of the water? And I'm not an expert in GRP. I'm a seaman, really. I'm an expert in seamanship. But what I would say is that when I worked at Cowes long years ago at the National Sailing Centre, as then was, it's now the UKSA, which is a different thing altogether. We were a government institution, and every winter we took our boats out for 3 or 4 months and gave them a really good refit, and none of them ever got osmosis. My boat is 35 years old, and it's spent most of its winters out of the water. It's got no osmosis at all, and I think by drying the boat out, you give it every chance to avoid this plague. So I would say, if you've got a GRP boat and all things are equal, there's a lot to be said for taking it out of the water, because it gives it a chance to thoroughly dry out, which does it nothing but good. This is from Webster at Shamrock Quay, who says, have I got a favourite way of treating and cleaning teak decks? Yes, I have. I've got an answer to that one. And it's come to me from Halberg Rassi. If you've got teak decks, the horror is that over the winter, they all go green, don't they? Every time they go green. And while they're at it, the covers go green on your boat, your cockpit covers, everything goes green, your sail cover goes green. And it's miserable. It's one of the worst things about having a boat in Britain in the winter. It's a miserable, damp, dark place, isn't it? And mould loves it, so it grows on the teak deck. Well, Halberg Rassi have got an answer to this, and it's available to all of us. If you read the Halberg Rassi owner's manual on page something or other, it says, do not scrub your teak decks too often. And that's the point number one. Don't do it, because if you get a stiff brush and welly into them, you're scrubbing the soft part of the wood out from the grain. It's called the pith. I'd like to say you're scrubbing the pith out of the decks, but I might be misconstrued, and this is a family show. So you are really damaging the teak if you do that. Much better to scrub across the grain and not do it too often. That way you give your decks a chance to survive. But you don't have to scrub them at all if you do what Mr. Halberg Rassi says and get some product called Boracol. It comes in large containers and it costs an arm and a leg, but it's cheap at the price, because this is what you do. You get a paintbrush, and if you're getting a bit decrepit like me, you don't go down on your knees to do it. You get some wire clips and you clip it to a broom handle so you don't have to bend down. Then you get the Boracol, which is a liquid, and you pour it into a bucket, and I think you put some water in with it. I'm not sure, but it's all in the instructions. I can't remember now, because now my boat lives in a warm shed in Denmark. I don't have to do this anymore. I don't have this problem, but I certainly did. So I got the mixture all ready, and then you stand on your deck, you dip the brush in at arm's length, and you stand up and you just walk around the deck and you literally paint it on. That's all you have to do. No scrubbing, no messing about. You paint it on, and it looks a bit soapy when it goes on, and you leave it there for 3 days. So do it on a dry day and try and choose a day when the Met Office says it's not going to rain for 2 or 3 days. Then come back and look at your boat. It will amaze you. The deck will be clean, there will be no green on it, and it will have gone a lovely silver colour. To be really happy, you can pour some fresh water on it, get the hose going and give it a good old hose off. Very light scrub across the grain, but you don't have to do that if you don't want. I never did. I just used to put my finger over the hose, get a bit of pressure and squirt it off. And it comes up lovely. And it stays lovely all season long. You do this in the spring and it gets into the wood. It's basically a rot preventer. It was developed for preventing rot in wooden boat construction, but now it's used simply to clean up your decks, and it's wonderful. And if you've got green spray hoods and things like that, and they're canvas, you paint it on with your paintbrush, and they go nice as well. It's a miracle. It's the best thing anybody's ever invented. I love it. Boracol. It cost me about 100 quid for 5 gallons, 25 litres. I've still got half of it in the shed, and I put a gallon in a can and take it down to the boat and have it on board, because you always use it. There's always something that goes green. Boracol. Best tip you'll get this winter. Who's next? This is Steve Hodges at Chatham Park Marina. Have I got any recommendations for cruising around Britain? Would you go clockwise or anti-clockwise? And would you go through the Caledonian, or is it worth going all the way around the top? Well, I've been around Britain twice. What I would say is this: have an open mind, because it's the same distance whichever way you go round. And if the wind is set in the southwest and you're on the south coast, or you're coming around from the Thames, the received wisdom is that you go around Britain clockwise. There's a number of reasons for that. The first is that you get the bullet bitten early on. You get down channel, you get to Land's End, and then you're away with a westerly wind or an easterly wind. You're fine. If it's blowing from the north, you're dead unlucky, and it probably won't blow for very long. So that's the received wisdom. There's more received wisdom that every fishing boat that ever went out of East Anglia, in the days when people still had some superstition and wouldn't let a parson on the boat, and went home if they passed a sweep on the way to the boat. If they saw a sweep, they went home again and had a cup of tea and then went out afresh. When they came out of harbour, they always made their first turn to starboard, because they reckoned it was unlucky to go the other way. Now, don't ask me the reason for that, but you don't ignore these guys, you know. Don't ever sail on a Friday on a long trip. It's fine if you just pop in across to France, going to Holland for your summer holidays, don't worry about it. But if you're off on a trip around the world, or you're going off for your ark, or going to the West Indies, don't start on a Friday. Really bad idea. Don't ask me why, but there it is. I wouldn't do it. I never have, and I haven't come to grief yet, touch wood. If you're going to go round clockwise, and it's blowing hard from the southwest, and looks like, according to Mr. Passage Weather, it's going to carry on blowing from the southwest for the foreseeable future, I'd go the other way. Why bash your brains out for getting all the way down the channel, especially from Chatham, all the way down channel against the southwest? Don't do it. Just make it a fair wind and go north instead. Makes sense, doesn't it? In the end, it won't really matter which way round you go. The east coast, once you get past East Anglia, hasn't got a lot going for it, really. There's some interesting stopovers in the northeast, Blythe and so on. But when you get further north, until you get to Scotland, there isn't that much. But if you've got a fair wind, you can gobble that up pretty quickly if you want. And once you get to Scotland, there's all sorts to do. And then you have to make the decision. Do you go through the Caledonian, or do you go around the top? Well, personally, if I had the time and I wasn't in a rush, I'd go twice, and I'd do both, because both are absolutely wonderful. Going round the top's thrilling. It really is. You'd come out, you'd probably start from Wick if you were going east about, or west about, you'd come in round Cape Wrath. And you have to get the tide right, because the tide absolutely boils through the Pentland Firth inside the Orkneys, between Scotland and the Orkneys. There's a tide race there called the Merry Men of May. The Merry Men of May, isn't that wonderful? And I used to know an old chap called Captain Bennett on the Hamble River, who'd been a destroyer captain in World War II. And he was an interesting chap, Captain Bennett. The ladies loved him, and he lived on a little boat, a 30-foot Bermudan sloop. And I remember one day this woman had brought him a big apple pie down, and it was wonderful, and it was so big he couldn't get it down the companionway, so we all crowded in his cockpit and we ate it. Don't know what the lady thought of that, but we enjoyed the apple pie. But Captain Bennett said to me, there I was in my destroyer doing 15 knots through the Pentland Firth, and when I got to the Merry Men of May I found I was going backwards over the ground. He liked a yarn, but maybe he was, because it's a powerful thing. But if you go around the top, it's absolutely thrilling, and you can call in at the Orkneys and have a different experience. Going through the Caledonian Canal is simply wonderful. It's a great joy, all the way down Loch Ness with the mountains rising up to the sky, and then finally coming out at the western end and going down Neptune's staircase. I think it's 14 locks, and when you stand at the bottom of that and look up it, you can't believe you've come down it. And when you're about to go up it, because you're going west about, you look at it and you think you'll never reach the top, but you will. And when you get there, you've got the whole of the Great Glen in front of you. So I don't care which way around you go, really, mate. Suit yourself, but make it easy. That's the thing. Make it easy on yourself. It's always worth doing that. Now here's a tricky one. We've got Jelfs from Bricks and Marina, who wants to know about downwind reefing techniques with single line reefing. Well, I don't think you can do it. If somebody wants to send me an email and correct me, I'd be pleased to hear from them. But I'm not a great fan of single line reefing. It generates huge amounts of rope in the cockpit. Unless you've got really expensive rope and really good blocks in the boom, you have all sorts of friction issues, and the rope stretches and you end up with a crinkle cut luff like a chip, and it's not good. The boat won't sail properly, the clew starts pulling away. It's not a happy thing. And what really gets me about it, well, two things really. The first is you only generally get 2 reefs with single line reefing, and when you want to shake a reef out, you have to get up on the end of the boom and pull the reefing line through, because it doesn't just run out. On a really expensive boat with super Harken blocks everywhere, it just might. But in my experience, it usually doesn't. And you have to pull like this. And that's not how you're designed to pull. And you pull like that, and you rip your rotator cuff in your shoulder, and then you got misery and a big chiropractor's bill. It's just not a good system, and you end up with a cockpit full of masses of rope. It's perfectly possible to have a situation where you reef the mainsail and don't have to leave the cockpit if you've got slab reefing. And then you can have 3 reefs, and you can do it easily, and you don't have a cockpit full of rope, and you can reef going downwind. The thing about reefing downwind is that you have to control the leach tension of the sail while you're reefing. Otherwise, it wraps itself around the spreaders and it gets itself into an awful mess, and you can get damage. Now, I've reefed going downwind quite frequently in moderate-sized boats like this 34-foot westerly that we're talking about. And if you've got conventional gear, what you do is this. You have one chap at the mast to pull the luff down, if that's what you're going to do. Somebody eases the halyard carefully, and he pulls the luff down to put it on the ram's horn. While he's doing that, crewman number 3, or maybe the halyard man in rotation, gets some tension on the clew pennant to pull the leech away from the rigging. You can do this with the preventer still on if you're careful. I've done it. I went all the way across the Bay of Biscay once with a 34-foot westerly, with the boom vanged out, blowing like the clappers. We left with a full sail up, and we ended up with nothing. And we did the whole thing by this method. As you pull it down, you pull the reef on the clew end, and watch the sail really carefully to make sure it doesn't get into the shrouds, and it works. Now, the best way to reef a sail, if you've got slab reefing, if you don't want to leave the cockpit, is to put permanently rigged reefing lines on the tack cringles as they go up the mast. You need a little bullseye of some sort, or maybe a hook or something, at the tack end of the boom, so that when you pull this line down, it comes down through a turning block at the deck and back to the cockpit. It's probably a nice piece of Dyneema would be good. And as you release the halyard and let it down slowly, you pull this line in, and the whole sail just comes down sweetly. If you're downwind, you still have to take up the clew as you do it, but you can do it all from the cockpit. And when the tack is right down, you make this line fast somehow. You might have a jammer, maybe you've got a cleat, I don't know, whatever it is. Set the halyard up again and then just finish off with the clew and you're done. It's really worth thinking about that. If you've got ram's horns at the gooseneck, think about putting these little lines on instead and you won't have to leave the cockpit. I'm a great believer in not leaving the cockpit. It's nice. Okay, that's really the answer. I don't think you can do it with single line reefing, but you can if you re-rig your sail, and you'll have more reefs. This is about winter layup, and this is from Wolverstone Marina, from Thompson. Winter layup. Should I charge my boat batteries or just disconnect them after they've been fully charged at the end of the season? Well, this is close to my heart because my boat lives in a shed in the winter, and you're not allowed to have your batteries connected in that shed because they are really meticulous about making sure they don't get any fire, and they know that boat fires start from connected batteries and a short circuit. So they make you disconnect your batteries. And this is an interesting one. I've got AGM batteries now on my boat, and they really, as I understand it, need a bit of a charge every so often. You can't just walk away from them, even when they're fully charged. So my recommendation would be this. If you're afloat or if you're ashore, if you're within reach of your boat, fully charge your batteries and then take the main connections off so that maybe your battery bank is still connected to each other, so long as they're reasonably new. If you think one of them might be going down, then disconnect them all from each other, because otherwise the dead one will take the others with it. But if they're all healthy, just disconnect them at the end where they all join onto the boat system. And every couple of months, treat yourself. Come to the boat, have a walk round, see how things are, give her a bit of an airing, and hook up the batteries and charge them. Leave them on charge for a couple of days. Then take them off on Sunday night, get in your car and drive home, having disconnected them again. Have a nice weekend on the boat. Go on Friday night. Give yourself 48 hours to let the batteries get a good charge and settle down. And if you do that twice in the winter and disconnect them each time when you've done, I think your batteries will see you out probably. If they're good batteries and you look after them in the season, there's no reason why a decent set of batteries shouldn't last 8 years. That's what we do with them. I think that's the best thing to do. If you can't get to the boat and you haven't got a friend or a friendly harbour master who'll do it for you, your choice is to either leave them permanently plugged in if you're allowed to, and if you're alongside the dock and your batteries aren't any too good, it might be the best thing to do. But if your batteries are up together, I think it's best to charge them right up and disconnect them and walk away, and then come back as soon as you can and get some charge into them. I don't know what the battery men would say to that, but it's not an easy one, because leaving batteries connected with a charger on them always begs the question, what happens if there's a short circuit somewhere? Philip Aitken at Ocean Village in Southampton. UK boating novice, what are your top tips for continuing to boat through the winter? Well, good for you for wanting to do that. I think we should. I think you get some great sailing in the winter time because there's nobody out there. Everyone's gone home. They're all the footballers. I don't know what they're doing on a Saturday afternoon, but it's lovely to go down there at the weekend and have the place to yourself, especially if you get a bit of time off at Christmas. This is the one sadness for me about the fact that my boat is now laid up for the winter in a shed. I'm very, very busy. I just don't have time to do this anymore. But in the days when I had a bit more time, my wife and I, and the kids when they were growing up, we used to love to go down to the boat before Christmas. We'd take the turkey and the bits and pieces and we'd have Christmas on the boat and we'd go sailing for a week. And if the weather was if the weather looked like being absolutely atrocious, and these days with modern weather forecasts, we've got a good idea, haven't we? So if the weather looks like it's going to be halfway decent, go to the boat, enjoy her. And there's not much you have to do really. You want to leave her in commission. If you're not going to go down for 2 months, well, take the head sail off, put it away and give it a treat, and make sure the sail cover on the mainsail is intact. And then when you go down, it's not a big deal to put a head sail up really on a medium-sized boat. If you've got a 60-footer, you might want to think twice about that. For most of us human beings, it's all right. Otherwise, there's not that much you have to do really. I think It's great to go down to your boat. When I had my boat in England all the time, I didn't used to take her out of the water. I used to keep it in the water, and I used to charge the batteries by going down there every couple of weeks. I'd run the engine, put it in gear, run it up to temperature against the shorelines because she was alongside, and that was the best thing we could have done for her. I had a fire on board, a lovely coal stove. I used to light that up, get her right up, lovely and warm, stay overnight, have a nice bacon and egg in the morning, run the gas stove, run everything. Put the lights on while the boat's plugged in and on charge. While she's charging, put everything on. Run the radar, make it go round, make it remember it's got a life. Because things die in the winter. You come back in the spring, you flash it all up, full of hope, and it doesn't work. It's worked all season, and you leave it and it dies. Well, that's what things do. That's what mechanical things do. So if you can get down to the boat and do that, it's best. But to go sailing in the winter, you wanted some tips for that. Well, the first thing, you've got to have a good cabin heater. Absolutely vital. I've been teaching sailing in the old days. We used to go out in the winter, and there were some sailing schools had the brass neck to take people's money and then send them out on a sailing course in the winter, a competent crew course with no cabin heating. No cabin heating. What are they thinking about? What must these students have thought about sailing? They must have thought this is an absolute passport to misery and it's costing a fortune. No, get a good cabin heater. I don't really mind what it is. I mean, I like solid fuel heaters, but if you like blown air heating, well, that's all right. You know, if it works for you, it's fine. So whatever it is, make sure it's working and make sure it's good, and don't be afraid to use it. The nice thing about a solid fuel heater is you can burn it while you're sailing, and I think you can burn a diesel heater when you're sailing. There's some you can't, but if you've got a blown air one, you probably can. So you can have a lovely warm cabin when you get in. Vital. Next thing is, don't be too ambitious about your passages. Don't think because in the summer you might start from Chichester and take an ebb tide and get all the way down to Poole on one tide. You don't want to do that because you'll be absolutely frozen. It'll be an endurance test. Don't do that. And if you're sailing on the east coast, maybe a quick romp up the Wallet and get into the next one. But you know, don't think you're going to go 50 miles in a day because you won't enjoy it if it's cold. Just make a nice little trip that you can do in one tide at the very most. Make sure you've got plenty of warm things to eat and drink. That goes without saying. Here's a good tip. You'll have a bottle of whiskey on board, I'm quite sure, because you're all sailors. Take a bottle of Crabby's ginger wine as well and mix with the whiskey and have a whiskey mac when you get in. First thing, get the anchor down or get tied up to the marine and get plugged in and pour yourself a whiskey mac, and pour one for all hands as well. It'll cheer you up no end. And it doesn't give you a hangover. It's magical, but it's got to be Crabby's ginger wine. One question from further down the list was, what sort of clothes should we wear for winter sailing? He said, I like cotton and wool. Do you know, so do I. 50 million sheep can't all be wrong, can they? They're all wearing wool and they're all warm. Up on the moors in winter, they're fine. All those Swaledale sheep, those beautiful animals careering round up there, they're okay. So why shouldn't we do the same? I like it. We've got wonderful oilskins now that will keep us dry. So that's all right. We're not going to get wet. No reason for that. We've got proper boots. And what are we wearing underneath? Well, you can wear first layer and middle layer and goodness knows what layer. And if it makes you happy, that's all right. This is what they wear when they're going around Cape Horn. But I've got to tell you that if you wear that thermal underwear that you buy, it'll stink within a day. It'll be horrible. It's not only me. I've noticed it on my shipmates. It's nasty. And you can't wash it out there, can you? Because it's just not convenient. So you're stuck with it. If you wear a lovely cotton vest underneath it, or a t-shirt, I always wear a cotton, I've got one on now, a cotton t-shirt. You can wear that for days at sea and you won't know the difference. And if you wear a nice wool flannel shirt on top of it, you're warm already. And then probably a modern fleece on top of that and you're home free. You'll be all right. So that's the sort of clothes I wear. If it's really cold, I make sure I've got my salopettes on, even if it's not raining. I usually wear a pair of sloppy old cords under that, or a pair of jeans, and under them I wear a pair of cheapo, just some sort of long johns. Long johns is what you want, and then you're going to be warm. You're not going to get cold, especially on these short sprint trips that you're going to do. Not go tearing around for trying to do too much. This is a very technical question. It's probably not very interesting to most people, but it is to Andy Marshall of Sparks Marine. How do I get 50 years of deck paint off my GRP Elizabethan 29? Paint stripper doesn't work. God, that was a lovely boat, the Elizabethan 29. A lot of them were home built. You bought the hull and you did it yourself, and I think some were probably professionally done, but they're beautiful hull, really lovely, wholesome hull, and good sailing boat. They're a creature of their day, and they had painted decks, and the paint's gone on and on and on. So what are you going to do about it? Well, if it was a wooden deck, which I've had to do with a painted wooden deck, it's easy. Burn it off. Get a blow lamp and burn it off. And while you're burning it off, the heat from the gun will reset the pitch in the seams. So if you've got a wooden boat, that's the answer. If you've got a plastic boat, it's not so easy, because you can't use a blow lamp on anything that even looks like GRP. Horrible things will happen. A heat gun you might get away with. You'll have to be careful, because if it hits the gel coat, it's probably not going to do it any favours. But if you're careful with a heat gun and offer it up carefully until the paint just starts to bubble and give it a scrape off, see how much you get for your money. You might find there's another layer underneath, and you can just go through like that. It'll take a long time, but it's all right. The best answer is to blast it off. Find a man with a sandblasting equipment, a professional. It's a messy business. It'll mess up every other boat in the yard, but put a tent on if you can. Pay somebody to do it, and it'll be done in no time, and you'll get a great job. So those are the two answers that I can offer. I agree with you, paint stripper's no good at all, and it's horrible stuff. I don't think it does you any good if you get too close to it. Here's a good question from Gooley at North Marine. Well now, Gooley, he says, including yourself, what's your favourite number of people on a yacht? Two people is my favourite. It's myself and my wife, who these days will be called my partner. The thing about that is, we've been together for rather a long time. We know we get on together, and the reason why we work together on the boat is before we go to the boat, we decide what we're going to do. The secret of happiness on a boat with a crew together is for everybody to have the same motivation, for all hands to want the same thing. If you've got a family and teenage daughter really wants to go to Gunwharf in Portsmouth and get in the shops there and offload her father's credit card, and dad really wants to sail around the world, and mum's very happy just to go up to Chichester, go ashore in Itchen and have a meal in the pub, you've got three different mindsets, and they're not really going to be that happy together. As a family, they'll probably find a way to rub along. But if they're not a family, you've got a formula for disaster. These three people will not get on at all on a boat. You've all got to want the same thing, and you've got to know you want it. And if you do, then you'll be serving the boat. You'll all be doing what you can for the boat to help her deliver what you want. And therefore you'll have a good time. It's as simple as that, really. Serve the ship and she'll serve you. But you can't serve the ship if you all want different things. So the reason why, in my case, getting on with my wife is quite simple, is that we both want the same thing. We both want the boat to do the same thing. Deep down, we might have slightly different motivations, but we settle down, we reach a compromise that we can agree to and that we're both content with, and then we go and do it. And it's joy all the way. Same thing must happen if you're going out with a bigger crew. You've got to all sit down. Let me tell you a story. An old mate of mine, and he is an old mate, he's very old, and he circumnavigated in the 1950s, ancient history. He circumnavigated with some mates of his on a very old boat from South Africa. And these were very wise guys. It was very late in the 50s, and by the time they came back, it was actually the 1960s. They had all sorts of adventures, and they had a successful circumnavigation. And before they went, they all sat down and said, well, how are we going to get on with ourselves for all this way? How are we not going to fight? Because everybody does. You know that. You see boats arriving after something like an ark. There's guys on the foredeck with their bags packed. They can't get off quick enough, and they're going to fill in the skipper. You know, this is not the way to go on. What these guys did, they all sat around the table, they had a glass of beer, and they decided what they were going to do. And they wrote it down. They wrote down the policy of what they were planning to do, and they wrote down ship's articles that they all agreed to. Who was going to pay what and when? Who was going to do what for the boat? Who was going to be in charge of this? Who was going to be responsible for that? They all looked at it till they were all happy with it, and then they all signed it, and then they went off around the world. And if at any stage a bit of grief started to develop, which of course it did, because you had 5 young men on there, goodness knows, formula for disaster. And they got out the ship's articles. They put it on the saloon table, they sat down, they had a glass of beer, and they reminded themselves what they'd all signed on for, and they couldn't argue with it. And it worked. It worked. They went round the world. So that's the secret. Motivation, everybody knowing what the deal is. So 2 people can't go wrong, mate. I would go with that. And if your partner turns out that she really hates it, you've got 2 choices: either join the golf club or get a new partner. But if you get it right, I think she'll love it. Or maybe it's he. Whichever it is, it'll be all right. This next question's particularly interesting, and I think there's a lot of truth in it. This is Hoskins from Mercury Yacht Harbour. He wants to know, is it my imagination, or have weather forecasts, especially those from Grib files, tended to consistently underestimate wind strengths in the last couple of years? He goes on to say, often by 2 Beaufort forces. Well, you know, I've noticed this. Have you? Grib files, for those who don't know what they are, these are internet weather forecasts. They're quite sophisticated. They're easy to get and they're free. They come from America. And they give you little arrows all over a chart that show you what the wind's going to do for the next 7 days. I think they even go to 10 days, actually. They also will show you wave height, all manner of things. And they are pretty good. But they do underestimate. I know they do. It's not just anecdotal. I talked to a weatherman who says, yeah, it's a good thing to add a Beaufort force to those. So that's the first answer to the question. If you look at the Met Office, don't worry about the shipping forecast for a moment. Have a look at the weather forecast for your local area. I do this every morning. Every morning that ever comes, while I'm having my cup of tea in bed, I get my iPad out and I look at the synoptic chart, the surface pressure chart, to see what's going on. It's a really good thing to do that, you know, every day, because you look at it and then you can make your own prediction as to what might be happening, and then you draw the curtains and look out the window and see how smart you've been. See if it makes any sense. Watch the clouds going by. Did you get that right? And so on. Really good thing to do. Having looked at that and made your conclusion, then have a look at your local forecast. It's all there on the Met Office site. Put your postcode in or something and up it comes. And it gives you a 5-day forecast. The wind forecast, they always give you 2 wind strengths. They give you the ambient wind strength and they give you the gust wind strength. And the ambient wind strength might be 10 knots and the gust's going to be 20. It's almost invariably almost double. And you look at it and you think, well, that's not much good to me, is it? I want to go sailing today and, well, let's say the forecast was for 18 knots and the gusts were for 35 knots. Well, you don't want to be out there in 35 knots, do you? But 18 would be very nice, thank you. So what are you going to do? You have to make your own judgment. Look at the synoptic chart, think about what you know about local conditions and make a decision planned on that. The reason why things tend to be windier than they appear is because of this factor. They're trying to predict the wind. It's very difficult for them because the wind isn't a solid item that's absolutely predictable. It pipes up round headlands, it pipes up down river mouths, it pipes up all over the place. And they can't tell you exactly what it's going to do everywhere because it's just not viable. So you have to make your own decision. And I've been finding this these days, that the prevalence of modern weather forecasting is such, it's so good now and you get so much detail that I tend to look at it and think, oh, it might be 35 knots in the middle of the channel. I don't think I'm going there. No, I won't. I'll just stay home. And I'm becoming less adventurous because of this. So actually, if our mate is finding the weather forecasts a bit light, so long as he's got a good boat and he can handle it and he can deal with a bit more weather, it's sort of quite good really, because in the old days when it said Viking force 4 to 6, you'd think, well, it'd probably be force 4 and off you go, and you only had it for 24 hours anyway. So you often did get caught out by heavy weather, but my good, we made some passages because we were tending to be a bit more optimistic. So I've been rabbiting on here. I think the truth of the matter is that a lot of forecasting is a bit on the light side, but so long as you're aware of it and you're prepared for the worst, have a look at that. Have a look at that Met Office forecast that shows you what the upper limit might be, and that's very, very helpful. Here's an interesting question. This is from Mike Hoseason. People seem to be buying bigger and bigger boats. They do, don't they? 27 foot used to be regarded as more than adequate for coastal and European forays. In your opinion, are bond boats less seaworthy, or is it just a question of comfort? God dear me. Well, I could put a lecture together about that. I could talk for an hour about that, but I better not. There's no doubt boats are getting bigger and bigger. Quite honestly, when I walk around Southampton Boat Show, when it's there, I lose the will to live. Because I look at all these great big boats with these great big huge fat sterns and 2 wheels, his and hers, on the edge, because the boat's so wide you can't see anything from the middle. Another thing I've noticed is that topside height, freeboard, is getting higher and higher. Now, really, the one you want to talk to about that is my wife, because she's the one who gets off when we come alongside, because she's much sprightlier than me, much better looking and far more athletic. So she hops off with the ropes, and I'm okay at driving boats, so I drive it in and she goes off with the ropes. Every now and again we get involved with charter boats, and we were on a boat the other day of German extraction. I won't mention any names, and she looked down from the top. She said, it's like looking down a cliff face, this. I can't get off here. And you know, I looked at it and she was right. She had to sort of somehow scramble down. She needed a step. We had to put that little step over that you get that's a fender. What a nonsense in a 40-foot boat. You ought to be able to just step off it. You certainly can on ours, which is 45 feet. Easy, because it's a natural shaped boat that's sitting down in the water. These great big high boats that are getting there, they're so badly designed that to get freeboard, they have to get headroom, they have to go up rather than down. They should be going down into the water to get the freeboard, not sticking them up in the sky. If you read any proper learned tome about seaworthiness, you find that excessive freeboard is a really negative thing, and to have not much freeboard is a good thing. The man is talking about comfort. Now, comfort is a thing which is interesting to define. I think he's imagining that these bigger boats bring more comfort. Well, they do, so long as you're tied up in the marina. When you're not bouncing about, they are comfortable. You get a lot of room in them. You get lovely big bunks, which is great in harbour, just what you want. Some of the accommodation in the saloons is so badly designed, it's ridiculous. If you have a galley down one side and you're trying to perch on the other side to sit, it's awful, because you all sit in a row, instead of sitting now in a nice saloon with a seat either side, so you can talk to each other while you're there. That's so important, isn't it? But all that's thrown out the window to get more bunks in. So that's not comfort. Where it's not so much like progress is at sea. My boat, which is designed in America in the 1980s, is more like a traditional yacht. She's very deep bilge. She doesn't know how to pound when she's going uphill. She just slices her way through. She's very deep drafted. As a result, she's quite heavy displacement, and she is enormously comfortable at sea. In an awkward seaway, it's like being on an armchair. Some of the modern boats bounce about and blow about like crisp packets. You can't stop them at sea. You can't heave to in them because there's no forefoot. And if there's no forefoot, there's nothing to stop the bow blowing away, and they end up beam on, which is dangerous. So that's not good either. You get wonderful comfort in harbour, but the comfort at sea is not so great. The size issue, I don't know what's happened there. Cars are getting bigger too, aren't they? I live in the country, and there's lots of old little garages around in the cottages. And I've got a Saab that's about 10 years old now. I bought it new, it's 10 years old. I can't get it into those garages because it's too wide. You can get an Austin 7 in though, and you could get a folk boat into a nice little marina berth and have a lovely holiday in it if you don't mind going ashore, perhaps to cook your barbecue or something. It's lovely. But you can't get a lot of people into a folk boat. You can get a lot of people into a big Bavaria. So you just have to choose really what you want. size in itself is not a virtue. It's expensive and it doesn't necessarily make for comfort, but it does make for comfort in harbour. So that's the decision, the distinction that must be made. Okay, we got John at Torquay Marina. He's well down to the west there, and his question is, what's the best route to take to the Azores and back? Ah, that's a good seaman-like question. And he's down west. I reckon he's going there next summer, don't you? Fair winds to you, mate. And this is what you do. You take a good long look at the longest forecast you can get. Be aware that these forecasts deteriorate the further away you get from ground zero. They're great for day 1, pretty good for day 2, fair for day 3, and after that it's a loser, and you can't really be sure about what's going to happen on day 5. Have a look at the synoptic chart. Look at it for a long time to see what's developing. Don't just look at it the day before you go. Look at it for a couple of weeks to see how that high pressure system is developing in the Atlantic. And then, if all things are equal, depending on what time you go, you get a lot of northerlies and northeasterlies off the corner of Spain, which is not that far out from the Azores. Make use of those. Make your outward bound trip. If you don't know what's happening with the weather, go closer to Cape Finisterre, not that close, but 50 miles off, and then sheer out across the Atlantic to the Azores, and you might get lucky and carry northerlies the whole way across, and you'd have a wonderful trip. What a great thing to reach all that way. If you go direct from Falmouth or from Torquay, you might well find you're bashing into southwesterlies most of the way. Coming home, it's the other way around. If you go over towards Spain, you're very likely to get clobbered with the northerlies. I once crossed that way and got absolutely hammered so badly with the northerlies I couldn't actually get up into the Bay of Biscay. I ended up going to Vigo instead, where, I may say, I had a wonderful time, but that's another story. Best to go north a little way, get yourself into the westerlies and blow home like a gentleman. There we are.
Tom, that was fantastic. Thank you ever so much. I think that was probably the most interesting hour we've had in an awful long time. Tom, as ever, it has been really interesting. Thank you ever so much.
And thanks to MDL for putting this on. I love doing it. It's great fun to meet everybody and to have this chance. So thanks, guys.